Welcome to this episode of Circle Back. I'm your host, Sam Davidson. Today, I get the chance to talk with Ron Samuels, who is in the Nashville Entrepreneur Center Hall of Fame, most known for starting Avenue Bank, but not the only company he started. We dive into that, from founding an antique store to helping other people start and grow their companies to sending bricks in the mail. And as a result, doubling the customer market share that company had. This is a fantastic story, full of advice, and also gets at how Nashville has grown over the years. We're very excited, as always, to bring you Circle Back due to the generosity of the Beth and Randy Chase family. I give you Ron Samuels. Ron, first question I always ask everybody is, who was the first entrepreneur you ever remember meeting or knowing from childhood at any point in your life?
1968, first week on the job at First National Bank of Memphis, I met Kimmons Wilson, who was the founder of Holiday Inns.
Uh-huh.
And about 2 weeks later, there was a young man that came in, and it was Fred Smith to pitch his idea about a strange company that's now known as FedEx. So those were my first two.
Yeah, pretty busy week there. Two heavy hitters. I've never had anybody said that before. Okay, well, let's stay there for a second. What did you think in those moments? Obviously, if Fred was just pitching at the time, it wasn't yet the juggernaut that's FedEx. But is there anything you remember from those meetings of who those people were, the passion they had, what they talked about, their outlook? Anything you remember from them, and then maybe anything that you would later go on and apply in your own life?
Well, I didn't really get to sit in much of the meetings with them. I handled a few items for him personally at that time, and he was very active in the community. I do remember that, and very pleasant, very engaging. The other person that I met in 1968 or 9 was Jim Ayers.
Wow.
Who was working for a competitor in the hotel motel business. And Fred Smith was still trying to raise money and figure that out, so I really didn't get a chance to really spend a lot of time with him.
Yeah, and Jim has been in that seat as well, so we all miss him and appreciate his legacy. He's left. So that's unique. You got to meet him so early. Well, what about you? And again, we'll go back and look at this thing chronologically, but the other question I'd like to ask everybody is, what was the first thing that you felt like you did in your life that was entrepreneurial? So maybe not an exact business formation, but again, something from childhood or anything that you did.
A couple of things come to mind. I took a paper route first in a small little neighborhood. That lasted about 3 weeks, I think. Bike broke down. I got tired of it. But really, right out of Ole Miss, 1968, you have to kind of get back and look at the period. Everybody was getting drafted. Couldn't go to graduate school if you were healthy, and you were going to go to Vietnam. And so I wanted to go as an officer. Got drafted. Graduated May of 68. Drafted November of 68 and failed the draft physical. I was all set for officer candidate school, had a football injury that kind of knocked my hip out of place. I had a little limp. They didn't like that, so I was fortunate in a way, because then I had to make a decision about whether I wanted to be a banker or not. I was working at First National Bank of Memphis for Mr. Allen Morgan Sr., Norfleet Turner, two big names in banking in the past. Really enjoying that. And so I decided, well, I'm going to go to graduate school in banking. Well, to go to graduate school in banking, you had to be a vice president or better, had to have at least 5 to 7 years experience, and there was no intermediate school you could go to. So I decided that we needed to have an intermediate school. This was along about 69 or 70, and pitched it to the American Institute of Banking. They loved the idea, and we started, at that point, I was a co-founder to start the Mid-South School of Banking, and it later became the Barrett School of Banking. It still operates today. While I was doing that, I started dating my wife, Lynn, and I was into auctions, trying to buy furniture. I'd go to an auction, find something I might be able to use, a table, refinish it, and, use it. Our second date was I took her to an auction, and she loved it.
Okay, all right, we got to keep her.
Loved it. We got to having breakfast every Saturday. She looked in the newspaper one Saturday morning and said, "Hey, there's an auction in Wynne, Arkansas on a farm. Let's go." We did. This was 1970, late 70. I bought $2,500 worth of furniture. I knew the values of this. Hardly anybody showed up. It was the Alabama-Ole Miss game for the folks down in the Memphis area. Therefore, an Ole Miss grad, had my transistor radio, listening to the game. I just was paying $25 for this, $10 for that. When it finished, I had to write a check for $2,500. I told him to hold on to that check because I didn't have it, the money right then, and he was happy to do it, and I was making about $475 a month. Called one of my friendly bankers there in Memphis who said no, he wouldn't lend me the money. Convinced him to do it. The long story short is I didn't realize my girlfriend was an entrepreneur. We started Secondhand Rows, antiques, in Memphis, down at Overton Square, and I sold all those goods in about 4 months. Not all of it, but I sold enough to pay off the $2,500. We sold that business right after we got married and moved to Charlottesville, Virginia, and that business lasted for 52 years.
Wow.
And we met the couple that ended up, they were school teachers, that ended up buying it from the guy we sold it to. We were in Memphis. My mom had sent me an article, and they were wondering who started this business. And we showed up at the store and introduced ourselves. And the guy really got teary-eyed. He made a fortune out of this business as an exporter of leather-bound books. And when we introduced ourselves, he said, "Well, you got to come back here in the back." And I said, we go in the back, and there was the original sign that we had made for Secondhand Rows hanging up in his workshop. And he was just delighted to finally put all the pieces together. So those were my first two entrepreneurial, I guess, experiences.
Yeah, pretty significant. That's interesting at a minimum to think about. If you hadn't failed the physical, what your life, career, et cetera, might have been like. But then if you just decided to stay in the antique business, But let's go back a little bit more kind of to your childhood or upbringing. Where were you born? What was it, family like, education like, that eventually led to you getting into banking as that first job when the draft didn't work out?
I grew up in Memphis, but I was born in Oxford, Mississippi. All of my family was raised in either Water Valley, Taylor, Oxford, in that small little area. Grandfather farmed down there for somebody that we would spend a lot of time. He had watermelons, cantaloupe, beans, all that, a lot of farm animals. So on the weekends, we lived in Memphis, but it was only, an hour drive down to Oxford or Water Valley, and spend a good bit of time there. My uncle, one of the uncles, had gone to Ole Miss to play football, but lasted about 2 years. Nobody had ever gone to college, really. My dad had 3 brothers and a sister. Pretty typical of families back then. It was I was born in 1946, so still a lot of rural area in Mississippi. The farm didn't have the utilities in yet, so you had an outhouse. You had all of the things that, and I would listen to them playing music at night as a kid. One played banjo, we had guitar, we had a bass, and they just had a lot of fun. It was not that they had a band or anything, but they enjoyed music, and they kind of played around. So it was a little bit of a mix. I got into sports. Had good eye-hand coordination. I was the smallest guy ever on any team that I played for, but I thought I was destined for a career in baseball. And Louis Aparicio, Nellie Fox were small guys like me, and I could see myself as a shortstop for the New York Yankees. So that career did not work out for me. But, I went to Whitehaven High School, which was a big, comprehensive high school. Joined there from Graceland. We grew up on Graceland Drive behind Elvis's house. Wow. It was literally the back fence for Elvis's farm property at Graceland. And this was in the 50s. There was a guy named Woody Page who was the Denver Post writer and sports editor. Still, we had our 60th reunion 2 years ago, brought together. Quarterback at UT was Charlie Fulton, 1964 and 5. So you go back and look, it was just a dream. I mean, we played baseball every day. We played basketball. We played football. So I think what happened when I went to the comprehensive high schools, I didn't know all of those folks at Whitehaven. But I think that's where I began to kind of recognize that I was a little different than people were. I was friendly. I met people well, connected well, and kind of started recognizing myself as a leader. And I didn't recognize it at that time, but as I look back, my classmates said, "Hey, we want to run you for vice president of the class," I think when I was a sophomore, and I said, "Not for me. I'm an athlete, not going to do that." And then I said, "Well, look, y'all can run me, but I'm not campaigning." And she said, "That don't matter. You're going to get elected." And so I laughed at it, and then suddenly I got elected. Then I got elected president the next year and president for the senior class. So it set a expectation for me, which I didn't have. So when I look back over the years and kind of think, well, how did you get here? Because I had plenty of opportunities to go another direction. I mean, there was a lot of influence. Smoking cigarettes and drinking beer was a big deal back then. It wasn't drugs. So I was fortunate.
And you go to college, and you studied banking in college?
I did.
And so what prompted that choice, given your burgeoning political career? It seems like.
Well, the thing was, my roommate was very bright, Jackson, Mississippi, fellow by the name of Albert Simmons. He became a banker, too. We both started out together. We fraternity brothers there. And the accounting professor, Gene Perry, which is the building's named after Gene Perry down there, was our Sigma Nu advisor, encouraged us to really focus on accounting. I barely made it through the first year. If my roommate hadn't been that smart, I probably wouldn't have made it. But that sort of set the pace for me. I got to study with some people that had a good background in finance and that sort of thing. And I said, well, look, this banking and finance thing looks pretty good to me. But I didn't know all the issues that were facing the country at the time. Vietnam was really just beginning to happen in '64. You had James Meredith enter Ole Miss in '62. It happened, I was there that weekend visiting my grandmother, who lived off the square. I mean, so all of these things, when I look back on it, kind of set the stage for early decisions that I made that I felt pretty good about.
And any inclination at the time, any just fleeting thought of maybe I'll start a bank one day?
No. Now, fact is, when I had to beg them to hire me. They hired me so I could get my finance and banking degree.
Okay.
I had to work a summer before you graduate, so I worked for First National of Memphis with one guy that went to Yale, one went to Princeton, and another guy at W&L and me and they tried to hire the other three, and they didn't take the jobs, and I was sitting out there, hey, how about me? And so I did finally talk them into it, and they set me up with the chairman and president. I was their gopher, and played golf with the customers, and so I had a chance to really explore the different areas of banking, and really liked helping people. That meant lending money. And I love that. I thought I wanted to be in investments, but everybody said, well, Ron, you got to have experience. And I said, well, that's what I'm looking for, And they said, well, you got to have experience for us to hire you. So I didn't do that. But that's sort of how I got into it. And then I was there from 68 to about 71 or so. And one of my clients said, hey, you've helped us start this leasing business. Come be the treasurer and credit guy for us. And that would have been 1972 or so.
Okay.
And so I kind of left banking, and here was another entrepreneurial opportunity.
Yeah. Is that where you went to Charlottesville?
That is.
Okay.
And I look back on that, and I never saw myself as an entrepreneur really until I started Avenue Bank, and I was filling out all these federal forms, and I'm sitting there with a glass of wine and talking to my wife one evening, and I said, man, there's a lot of paperwork to this. And they said, well, tell us what, how you're entrepreneurial. I said, well, and we were talking, and she said, well, Ron, you started, the Mid-South School of Banking. We started, the antique business. And then, I never looked at the not-for-profit world that I was engaged in for Nashville, really, as a entrepreneurial thing. But the more I thought about it, I was a co-founder of many items throughout my work with the community here. So, but starting a bank, when I did that first interview at the bank, they said, well, what's your goal? And I said, my goal is to run a bank one day.
Wow. And
they said, well, that's not possible.
Why?
And I asked the same thing. I said,
Okay.
Why not? And they said, well, Ron, you're not mean enough.
Oh.
Yeah, and I said, what do you mean mean enough? And they said, well, you might have to fire some people. I said, well, I think I would handle that maybe a little, hopefully that person wasn't going to be surprised that they were going to exit the company. But it was an interesting time, because if you go back and look at, what was it, the show Ad Man, it was white shirts, very short hair. I had a little long hair. That wasn't too good. Suits.
Yeah.
Everybody had a hat. It was the picture that you see in the series.
Yeah.
And it was different. Women were not part of the workforce. The women were tellers. When I started banking, there were a couple of women that had desk, but they were usually secretarial or assistant type jobs. So a totally different time.
So how do you get from Charlottesville, Virginia to Nashville, Tennessee?
Well, I was working for a big-time entrepreneur there in Charlottesville, and his name was Carl Smith. He lived in Farmington there, one Farmington Place, which was a beautiful small community not too far from the campus of the University of Virginia. He had a coal company, and this was 1973. We were there from 73 to the middle of 75 when we moved to Nashville. And Lynn and I got married in 72. It was important because the guys I worked with would come to work, 8 o'clock or so. I would get there a little earlier. It's where I met Gene Angle, a great friend of mine that ended up living here, and Lynn Lewis, who also was head of Channel 5 here. At one point, we all met in Charlottesville. And so I would get there early. Carl, who owned this company and the leasing company to shelter this income that he was having from the coal business, he would come in a little later, 10 o'clock-ish, leave about 4:30 or 5, but he would come back at 6:30 or 7 at night, and all the other guys that were young guys like me, they would come back, except me. And so Carl and I had this conversation about my work ethic, and I pointed out to him that I was there early, he wasn't. His wife loved Lynn and me, and we were great friends with them. And over time, I thought, well, we spent 2 years. It's time to get back to Tennessee. Both families were in Tennessee at that time, our mom and dad, and my mom and dad and hers. She was in Knoxville, and mine were in Memphis still. But, and Carl and I had a great relationship, but I got into a different personality type of entrepreneurship, and this was his life. Yeah. I think the field may be named Carl Smith Field in Virginia today. He played football up there in the early 50s, I believe. Yeah. So as a result of that, I said, well, Carl, look, I want to be, with my wife at 7 o'clock at night, spending time there. We had no family in the area, and he said, yeah, I get that. But so I got a call just out of the blue from some folks that were going to start Commerce Union Bank in Memphis. And they had this fellow named David Roddy and a couple of other, and David ended up here. And a couple other guys that I knew. And so I flew down from Charlottesville, met with the board. They offered me a job to help get that started. I was on my way back to Charlottesville in the airport in Memphis, and a fellow by the name of Jack Donaldson, Doyle Rippey was the other guy that was in that both of them ended up here. Jack Donaldson said, what are you doing in Memphis? I said, well, I'm fixing to come back. I'm going to be with Commerce Union Bank. And he said, no, you're not. You're not. And I said, yeah, I'm coming back. He said, no, what I'm telling you, you're not going to work for Commerce Union Bank. That's why. He said, because I'm sending you to Nashville right now. And he went over to the counter. I mean, this is just the hand, of divine intervention to say, hey, here's a ticket. You're going to stop in Nashville. We got you a ticket from Nashville to D.C., and you can take the flight back to Charlottesville. So I called Lynn, and I said, hey, I'm not coming home right now. I'm going to spend some time in Nashville. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me. So I go back. I kind of committed to the people there to come back to Memphis. And they were very nice, very good people. And they said, Ron, you got to do what you got to do, kind of thing. And we came to Nashville. It was middle of 1975, which was 50 years ago. Yeah. Didn't know a soul. We had a dog named Puddin', a little dachshund. Great. And we had this great MGB that we toured around in the mountains in Virginia, and an Audi that wouldn't run most of the time. But it was the best thing possible for us at the time, right between Memphis and Knoxville. Yeah. And Nashville was really a small town at the time.
Yeah, tell me what Nashville 1975 looks like. Obviously, we know what it looks like now. We can see the skyline, and but looks like from a banking standpoint, because you've mentioned several that banks are starting in 60s, 70s, and what was either the regulatory environment, or why were people bullish on starting banks in Tennessee or growing banks in Tennessee back then?
Well, it was an interesting time. This is the first time I met Sam Bartholomew, who was an attorney here. He came, First American Bank was the leading bank at the time. The guys I worked with, Mr. Norfleet Turner and Alan Morgan, knew all of the bankers here, which would have been Andrew Benedict back then, and John Clay, And of course, Pat Wilson was very engaged with that, and so was Sam Fleming, was heading up Third National. Commerce Union was really a new bank in, I'd say, late 60s, early 70s. I didn't really know much about this market. I wasn't thinking like that at the time, but it was a critical moment in banking because banks had not been deregulated at the time. You couldn't cross county lines. You know, the bank here, we had acquired, First National of Memphis had acquired Whites Creek Bank and Trust Company here. The Teasley family owned that, and it was a small $10 or $15 million bank, and it was independent. So we were just an independent bank with the First Tennessee name to it, and so we had to comply with all the regulatory things. Both Sam and I met because his wife had gone to UT. She was our realtor, and he was working on regulatory issues as an attorney for First American at the time, and we had a chance to change the laws here, just like North Carolina did. Long story short is we weren't successful in branching and crossing state lines. As a result, North Carolina took over, outran everybody. Atlanta, same thing, and so
that's why Charlotte is Charlotte today.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it was an interesting time. It just it wasn't the right time for Tennessee. You got 95 counties with rural community banking at the time, and people were scared of it.
Well, and fast forward 50 years, just real quick, we've got a fintech accelerator. I've had a fintech accelerator here, and we've seen other markets like Charlotte has a great ecosystem there for creating new fintech-related startups, new banks, et cetera. And to think it's kind of 50 years in the making, so to speak. Obviously,
that's right.
Things happen sooner. I think healthcare is the same way in Nashville. Any city that seems to have planted its flag for an industry, you forget that a decision was made or some laws were changed or people came to an area, and it takes time to do that. You can't just set something up and think that one act or one company is going to create a whole new ecosystem.
Right.
So you see this happening as you're working for the bank here. What were some of those early years like, say, late 70s or into the 80s in Nashville banking? Because the city's growing, healthcare is probably taking root here, growing. Industry is growing. And so walk us through then what was exciting for you and then what you did next career-wise.
Yeah. I stayed with First Tennessee for a few years, about 79, early 80s. One of my board members, a fellow by the name of Buddy Skinner, and his family, Herbert Materials, the Herbert family here, W.G. Bush and Company, manufactured brick, had building material supplies. He wanted me to come and work for him, and I did that. I did it for about 3 years, and that was another really important, I think, for me, important experience because it was taking marketing and sales and elevating things, and I'd never done that before. We had about 28 to 30% market share for brick in this market. That was in year end 79. We came out with some new things that I had suggested that maybe was a good thing to do, was to actually understand who we were selling to, what they wanted, how they viewed our brick. We went from that with a new thing called 8 New Faces for the Future. We sent a brick to every home builder in Nashville, which the company said, "Ron, you're really nuts. You can't do that." And I said, "We did it. It's done." And
like mailed them one?
Yeah.
Okay.
We mailed them. We had them delivered. That's for, FedEx was up here, I guess. But we did it, and we went from 30% to 66% in the next 2 years. And, that was the first real experience that I had of actually running something and saw the result. Before, I'm helping other people build their companies. And in 1977, one of the great opportunities I had was working with Joe Ledbetter. Joe Ledbetter was the guy that founded Houston's Restaurant. After I couldn't talk him out of starting that, he was so successful. And, of course, we've got brick tops here. But those were the things that drove me, is because I loved the success of the people I was working with.
Yeah. And
for a long time, I never understood this, that really I think the thing that really motivated me was helping other people. And, and then I realized that at some point here, look, I'm helping a lot of people, but I'm not making as much money as maybe I need to make.
But your social capital, it sounds like all these people, you're not just name dropping. I mean, these are people that you got to know.
Oh,
you
yeah.
got to know their families. You got to know their businesses.
Yeah.
So how much of that then, or what is the next move? I guess you mail the bricks to people. You double market share.
Yeah.
What happens after that?
Well, what happens then is the brick business was difficult. It's a small family business. I wanted to buy that business, so I went to see Jimmy Webb and Richard Chambers. Not thinking entrepreneur, but here I was. I understood it. Buddy happened to be the Brick Institute of America's volunteer president of that organization, and he tapped me as the marketing person for the Brick Institute because of the success we had. And then I knew what I was doing about marketing brick, and I went to see Richard Chambers and Jimmy Webb, and they said, Ron, we can't lend you the money to buy that, because I wanted to buy the kiln here and the one that we had over in West Tennessee in Dresden. And as a result of that, they offered me a job as head of marketing for the bank. So I was right back into banking.
Yeah,
and
you can't escape it.
No. So, and it was a perfect timing for me to do that as well. I ended up, Jimmy Webb was on the board at Vanderbilt, and they decided, Dean of the Owen School decided he wanted to try an experiment with similar to what they do at Harvard, and immersing senior level people into the School of Business, getting an MBA in 6 weeks. Wow. And they didn't know if it would work or not, but there was 19 of us that ended up. Jimmy came to me and said, hey, I want you to do this. And it's the other thing that is one of those just moments that really changed me, in the sense that Terry Deal was one of the adjunct faculty members. Terry wrote the book called Corporate Cultures, along with a guy named Kennedy, and I think it was Alan Kennedy, and it was the chance to spend time at night after dinner sitting at the table with the founding member of Boston Consulting Group, with executives that, at this time it's 1984, so I'd been out of school a good bit. I mean, I graduated in 68. So I met Terry and I was reading a lot about the In Search of Excellence and Tom Peters. And I was also teaching classes at night here for the American Institute of Banking. So I was keeping up with the current stuff that was going on, and having that experience and ending up with an MBA from the Owen School at Vanderbilt was just not even in my dream. There was no way they were letting me in the school. I mean, without that. But it really drove a lot of the things, I think, that allowed me to actually start a bank. And a lot of people said, why did you wait till you were 60 years old to start a bank? And I said, they wouldn't give me the money when I was 50, So I felt like there was a purpose out there, and that when I look back on that and I see the people that hired me for First National of Memphis say to me, Ron, you can't fire people. Well, I headed up at least 13 or 14 mergers and acquisitions where I had to eliminate, people. But the difference was, it was not a fit. When they understood where we had to go, which was sitting down with people and saying, look, you have this skill. That skill is not something we need going forward. and let's find out what that is for you.
Mm-hmm.
And I still get notes and letters from people from 20 years ago that said, thank you for allowing me to do what I would be the best at.
Yeah.
And another learning from, and it wasn't easy. That was a very, there's a lot of pressure to that.
And at this point, as you go back into banking, are you thinking at all about maybe starting one
No.
day? Still not even a
No,
thought.
because, I'm looking at, some of the biggest banks in the country
Yeah.
are now looking at Nashville. And when you look at the 80s, when you have the savings and loans closing up, all the banks are acquiring S&Ls.
Right.
And they didn't know how to merge those. I did. That was one of the things through all these other acquisitions when I guess it was one of the S&Ls here that closed down Fidelity Federal, which was the building that Union Planters occupied down at 4th and Union. They came to me and said, our chairman and president's going to be retiring. Can you come and help? Union Planters had bought it. And I went down there to help integrate, the savings and loan. And this was in, I guess, probably the late 80s. Mm-hmm. But it was a difficult time for everybody, kind of laying the picture out. There's no name of any bank was on the building when I came here. Suddenly, all these acquisitions, First American gets acquired, Commerce Union gets acquired, Nashville City Bank gets acquired by Dominion Bank Shares out of Roanoke, Virginia. One of the things they said, the only thing that's going to change is the name on your check, and they were lying. Yeah. Everything changed. Yeah. And then Dominion gets bought by First Union. So suddenly, First Union was probably fifth largest bank in the country, headquartered in Charlotte, North Carolina. And, knowing your customer is an important part of building on these mergers. People didn't like getting their mail from North Carolina and Tennessee. All these small banks that we bought, 13 of them, were in Pulaski, they were in Shelbyville, Paris, Tennessee, and it was a very difficult time, particularly for the community banking world.
And how do you get through that? And then what leads to you eventually deciding?
Well, and it was mergers and acquisitions. After you go through as many as I had, at one point, I understood what culture was about. And culture was not a big word most of the time back then. But knowing that you have to adapt and adopt to be successful, and you have to put the right people in the right jobs. You got to get them doing the right thing right now. And there's a sense of urgency about all this. So I saw, Regions acquire, I guess it was AmSouth acquires First American. At that same time, Civitas Bank is sold down in Franklin. Green Bank out of East Tennessee buys Civitas. Capital Bank and Trust gets bought by Renaissance Bank. Now you've got Regions merging with Union Planters, and I was heading up Regions for this area. Then just a few short years later, Regions and AmSouth decide that that's going to be a good merger. I knew it was going to be a disaster. I knew all the players. I knew the board. I was engaged and very fortunate. I loved the Regions people. And we had a very good merger of equals, if you can say equal. Somebody's always a little more equal than the other. But and then when that came along, I decided, look, I didn't I was not going to work well with this operation. And I think that's what my wife said is, play well with big companies, Ron. I mean, basically she was saying you're an entrepreneur. And see, all of these things that I didn't recognize were really happening around me. And so I decided, when that announcement came with Regions and AmSouth, a fellow by the name of Steve Johnson calls me the morning that I'm having the big meeting after being up all night. I'd gotten a call earlier that night. This is coming out on the wire. Call all your people together. So I had a call scheduled for everybody to gather at 8 o'clock. And this was the middle of May of, I guess, 2006. And to tell everybody. And a guy, Steve Johnson, calls me and he says, "Hey, Ron, I've been following your career."
Wow.
Never heard of him for my life. He's Atlanta. But little did I know, he had started 100 banks in these communities around. And I said, "Well, Steve, look, I know how to survive mergers." And he said, "Well, you're not going to like this." And he said, "Will you take my name and call me if you want to?" He said, "I think you're the guy that ought to start a bank."
Wow.
I later find out that he was working a lot with Bassberry Sims and a number of the lawyers up here. And they were the ones that said, "Hey, you ought to look at Ron. He could probably do this." I don't think anybody knew I was 60 years old. I turned 60. So, but at any rate, when that happened, I sat down with Lynn after Steve said, "Look, I think this can happen." I talked to Kent Cleaver, who I'd worked with, for 34 years, and Kent was not too excited about it, but got excited after I went to New York, met with KBW, the Keith Burrett Woods people, and they said, "Look, Ron," they knew a lot more than I did because all of those mergers, acquisitions that I just mentioned had not happened at that point. Yeah. So there was disruption in the marketplace that was going to be like no other time in the city's history in banking. So I come back, convince Kent that, look, this is something we're going to do. I turn in a resignation, and Kent resigned to me. Then I said, "Look, I'm going to start a bank." And the next thing we know, we were out there. We were able to raise $92 million, and we only needed 75. Okay. Made the most sense to take 75, and we closed February the 15th of 2007, right before 2008.
Good for you.
9 and 10. So, fun time. I can remember talking to my wife, and she said, "Well, look, Ron, our kids are grown." I said, "We're going to have to kind of rustle up as much as we can to be an investor in this." And she took me through this process of going, okay, Ron does not play well with, big banks. And then down here, she had on a sheet of paper that she made me write down, Ron has to be in charge. And then she said, capitalize everything. And then she told me, she said, look, this is an opportunity. You don't have an ego of sorts. You do this for the right reasons. You like serving people. And we need to do it. So I said, well, Lynn, there's no guarantee in this at all. She said, that's okay. I only wanted to, basically own my home and the car we drive. Yeah. So here we go.
So what, tell us the Avenue story. I mean, obviously you raised the money you just mentioned. I've got a couple of questions. One, how much at that point did what I'll call your community, all these names you mentioned, all these people you got to know after all that time in Nashville, did that help on this journey, whether it was just raising the money or first customers or people who can open doors? And then how does, given the timing, Avenue have the success that it had so quickly pre-exit? So walk us just through why you were running it.
I think it has everything to do with it. the time spent in the not-for-profit world, the time spent volunteering with the Chamber of Commerce. Look, I mean, when I resigned, and they really were delighted that I was resigning, I was chairman of the Chamber in 2008 through 10.
Wow.
Okay, so I had a platform where, I was going to be a story. I mean, so that gave us a lot of the advertising that I didn't have to pay for. But the other thing that happened is, the Preds, Craig Leopold, decided that he was going to move the Nashville Predators to Toronto.
Yeah.
Well, I got a call from the Chamber. Well, I told him because he called me to tell me he was leaving, and I'd helped him get started. So we said, well, look, we're not going to lose this team. So I ended up chairing. I was captain of our team, Nashville, in 2008. Well, I guess that ended up being 2010. And we were able to, get new ownership. We were successful with that. And at the same time, Marty Dickens was my lead director at Avenue, former head of Bell South. And I'd gone to him, number one, when I was thinking of starting the bank, and he agreed he was going to be a part of this. And Marty calls me and he says, hey, Ron, we need you to pull this financing together for the convention center. And I said, Marty, I don't have time to do, what I'm doing. No, take you 90 days. Well, it ended up 9 years later when we got the convention center accomplished. But that was one thing that I felt like was significant that had to happen for Nashville to elevate the hospitality. And we had a trade show venue here. We didn't have a convention center. We have a convention center, and we have built this city now, whether you like it or not. I mean, you can't stop it anymore. So, I go back and look at, golf, for instance. I played golf with a lot of these people I didn't know. I mean, that's what I came. Networking was not a word back then. My wife would be upset about it because I was taking time to do things at night. I was teaching. I was, going to play golf with. That's where I met Chad Atkins and Boots Randolph and Archie Campbell. And I end up meeting Dan Harrell and Mike Blanton. They were the, folks that managed Amy Grant, Michael W. Smith. And suddenly I was, engaged in so many different efforts here that all of that, there was a purpose in that.
Yeah.
I didn't know what the purpose was at the time, but it was obvious that, during this recession, we're growing $25 million a month.
Wow.
And I'm basically, people think we're out there hustling this business, and I was answering the phone because the other banks had to reduce their size to fit their capital. So the regulatory environment devalues all this real estate, and it's right out of the bottom line. So it was, while timing was terrible in, some ways here, it was perfect for me because the disruption was so significant. And, I didn't realize, frankly, just how significant that would be.
And you experienced its growth due to the community, your leadership, your involvement. What then led to you the team deciding to exit the business?
Well, that was the toughest part. I got to tell you that the banking community here was, significant because Terry Turner, Rob McCabe, had to, they were deselected, as they like to say, from the, merger with AmSouth. They start Pinnacle in 2000, 25th anniversary year for Pinnacle. And we laugh about it, but Terry was in my Leadership Nashville class of 1992.
Wow.
And, the other day I was doing a video for the 25th anniversary, and, we both said, look, little did we know we would both be starting banks in 1992 and joining together, and what a great honor for me to be able to work with these people that I had competed against most of my career here. But I knew they were rooting me on too, because we needed significant financial institutions in Nashville. So I think it's very significant. And then Terry would follow us. He and I would be in New York together a lot. So we were telling the same story to these investors. So that's why people started wanting to, do more in Nashville. And it was a hard thing because I had turned down every deal. And this is a good story. It's a funny story because we're in New York for the tree lighting. KBW had invited Lynn and me up for that event, and Terry was trying to reach me, so I get a message at my hotel from Marty that says, "Hey, Ron, why won't you return the emails from Terry Turner?" And I said, "Hey, Marty, I don't have any emails from Terry Turner or any messages." Now, Terry and I would meet almost every December with an offer.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Not that full, but this time I said, "Terry, I'm sorry. I didn't get anything." He said, "No, I had your wrong address." So fortunately, we got it right. And I met with Terry. This was, early December, I guess, or late November. For the first time, the numbers were significant. I mean, their stock value was way up. They could afford to pay a larger amount for us. It was not going to be damaging at all to them. And once I was walking back down the street, it was very cold that night. And of course, it's dark. It's wind blowing, and I call Marty, and I said, "Marty, here's what Terry wanted, and here's what they offer." And it was significant enough that we had to take that very seriously. Yeah. I guess fortunate in a way that the timing of all of that, and it was the hardest thing I've done in my life, because we had taken a startup and created a different experience for people for a bank. And it's something I'd wanted to do and had recommended to other CEOs I had worked for. And they didn't see what I saw was missing. And that was connecting. We had a personality. We hired people for fit. Interestingly, Terry and them hired only people 10 years of experience in a book of business.
Yeah.
I hired the most significant people I hired were some of the young people I hired that I told them they said, "Well, what is my job?" And I said, "You're going to be, working with our clients here, and these are the things that are going to be important." They didn't have a banking background, but we hired for a personality fit early. And that personality turned into the culture that we ended up with. Wow. And it was just amazing to see how, we opened that first office at Cummins Station on the corner. That day, we all huddled up over there waiting for the door to open, and first person in said, "I thought this was a restaurant." I said, "No, it's a bank." The second person came in and said, "Is this a restaurant?" And we knew we were on to something because it didn't look like a bank. It didn't have a teller row. We had low lighting. We had this great-looking 100-year-old floor that was in there with, a wonderful feel, a television over there, and everybody went, "Oh my God, he's got a television in there." Well, yeah, we had the tape running across. We had the business news, and it was a whole different experience. And everybody kept saying, "Well, what do you want me to do?" And I said, "Well, just do what you think's right," because I wasn't going to tell them what to do. We hired you because of you. Be you, kind of thing. So be authentic. Be genuine. And people tried to copy it, and they couldn't, we knew when we were getting shot by some of these other banks, and one bank I won't mention went back and they said, "Well, we know what they're doing." they're asking your name and they're smiling.
How revolutionary.
Yeah. So anyway.
And so since then, since the sale, you have not slowed down in the sense of your involvement, the community, the relationships, the ways that you're still impacting the city. What drives that for you, and what are you looking forward to still about Nashville? I assume you're still bullish, optimistic about the city.
Look, I kept telling people, everybody was saying, "Oh, this city's going to be just like Atlanta." I said, "No, we'll never be Atlanta." Okay, it may feel to some people that you're headed toward Atlanta, and we're not. The challenge is, look, we've got people wanting to invest here. How many cities have a brand as Music City, USA? And you just can't reproduce that. So I said, let's look at the issue is we've got to be good at managing this now. We created it, and you go back and look, and people have asked me many times about how did this happen? This was not accidental. No. This happened in the late 1980s when we started looking at the article that the Wall Street Journal put out there that said, we were falling behind in Nashville. We weren't on the radar. We decided to start Partnership 2000, and I was part of that steering committee. I was one of the young guys at that point on that, kind of just watching the leaders here and how this worked. And it's amazing because the key things that we did, we fixed it. We only had 4 ads that we put in Fortune magazine at that point, and a fellow by the name of John Huey was the Southeastern manager for Fortune magazine. He kept coming to Nashville after we started putting in ads. We had the American Airlines hub here at that point. So we had a picture of American Airlines lined up, at the thing, showing that this is not hee-haw town, which nothing wrong with that, but it's not that. We are a metropolitan area. We showed the airport. We showed education and Vanderbilt University, and we had a ad with the only taxi cab we could find at the time out there, yellow cab. It was showcasing the things that were our assets, and it started happening. Phil Bredesen builds the arena. Huge deal. A guy named Dick Evans, who had come here to be chief operating officer of Gaylord, was the New York Knicks and Madison Square Garden manager for Rockefeller. Great guy. Stayed only a short period of time, but he convinced Phil, I think, to give us an arena because we were going to Murfreesboro to see music acts. Yeah. So this helped. And then, so if you look at these keys, and we said, oh, by the way, we need to invest in sports. These companies that are moving from the Midwest to the Northeast, they're used to having 3 professional teams at least. And that's when people were kind of laughing at us in Jacksonville saying, hey, they're building this arena, they don't have a tenant, what are they going to do? Craig Leopold ends up with his business selling stuff to Gaylord. He and I end up being on the board of the Bell South Senior Classic golf event that was here in tournament for 10 years. And the next thing we know, Craig comes to me and a couple other people and say, hey, I'm thinking I want a hockey team. Wow. And it ends up being the Predators, and then here we go. Sports, Mike McClure with Bud Adams, reading a newspaper on a Saturday morning. They're in Houston. They look and they see this new arena going, and they say, well, how many professional teams do you have in Tennessee? Mike McClure tells me, he said, we looked, y'all got nothing. So they look at Memphis, they look at us, they mention it to Memphis. Memphis just couldn't get it going. The next thing we know, Bud Adams is saying, if you do these 8 things, we're bringing the team to Nashville. Wow. Huge deal. good housekeeping seal of approval took us from not even being in the picture to always being on the short list.
Yeah. Last question. So entrepreneurs listen to this, whether they're first time doing something or been at it for a decade. What are some pieces of advice, things to remember? You've mentioned several of these topics, from culture to knowing your customer to building these relationships. Anything else that you'd want somebody to remember or think about as they're doing their thing?
I think foundationally, it all starts with, and I mentioned, your spiritual life or your beliefs and character. And, I remember as a kid, I thought my mom and dad were ministers or something because I was in church all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it helped me kind of look at right and wrong. So I had a good foundation to start with. So that's really important. But then it becomes a thing of attitude, just believing in yourself and not going just crazy with it, but, don't try to be somebody else. Be yourself and be the genuine self. And I think, the key thing I found over time is just surrounding myself with good people, smart people, and listen. We became a family. Everybody wanted to sit down and write the mission statement and, all of the stuff that you would typically do. And I said, look, let's don't do that, because then you start quoting a mission statement. Let's just talk from our heart about what we're trying to do here. And it was amazing. One of the biggest investors we had when we had been in business, probably about 3 or 4 years, came to town, didn't tell anybody, came to meet with me, and he said, well, I want to know what y'all do here. He said, I went to all 4 of your offices. I got the similar story, but it wasn't a script.
Wow.
And I said, that is exactly, what we wanted to have happen. And I think our culture, we had a personality at first, and then it evolved into the culture. This is the way we do it here. I did not want to be the problem solver. And so I made it clear that everybody can lead from their seat. So if you hear people at the coffee or water fountain or wherever complaining about the idiot that's the CEO of this company, pull them aside and say, well, what do you want to do? How can we fix this?
Mm-hmm.
How do we make that better, instead of saying, come to me, oh, Ron, everybody doesn't like this. I said, well, that's great. Y'all fix it. Not me. And that's easier said than done, because, it was okay to make a mistake here. Just don't keep doing that. And don't be afraid to be great. There's no script. And just, and that's where we kind of had a family gathering. They love to call that. We had a smart room, too. That was where you could go, and we named it the smart room. And you could go in this room, bring anybody you want with you, because that's where we're going to solve this. And I think leadership is about influence. Influence is about putting other people's interests first, and that's what the key job, besides, the serving the customer, is to put our clients and others before yourself. And I think we tried to create this culture to give feedback to each other. That's a hard thing to do, but I think it's you got to find a way to be different.
Yeah.
And it's hard when your money's as green as everybody else's. You got to figure out that way to stand out. So I don't know. There are a handful of things like that. I think that over time really create the value.
Excellent advice. Ron, thank you for your time today. Thank you for all you've done for Nashville throughout your career. It's been a pleasure to get to hear the
Thank you.
story
It's
straight
great
from
to
you.
be here.
And love the journey. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was this episode of Circle Back with Ron Samuels. Hope you learned something from that EC Hall of Famer. As always, I'm your host, Sam Davidson, and Circle Back is brought to you due to the generosity of the Beth and Randy Chase family and in partnership with the Nashville Post. Be sure to share this episode, review it as well anywhere you listen to podcasts. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.